Hello everybody, welcome to our guests in person and everyone joining us online. Welcome to the hybrid seminar of the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation. I am Gaukhar Mukhatzhanova, Japan Chair for a World Without Nuclear Weapons here at the Center and your moderator today. Today we're launching a study on understanding the balance of confidence and feasibility in irreversible nuclear disarmament. So I'll provide a little bit of a background information about the subject and the study, and then Senior Research Associate Noah Mayhew will introduce the study itself and its main findings, and our Senior Fellow, Dr. Nikolai Sokov, will be a discussant. He's also a co-author on the study. So, the concept of irreversibility in nuclear disarmament entered the discourse in the context of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons in the run-up to the 2000 Review Conference, and became part of the agreed language under the 13 practical steps for nuclear disarmament. At the time, the conversation about irreversibility really centered on the fate of the fissile material coming out of the nuclear weapons programs as a result of massive arsenal reductions that nuclear weapon states, and especially the Soviet Union and the United States, were implementing at the time. So for non-nuclear weapon states and NGO experts, it was very important to receive some assurances that the nuclear material taken out of the dismantled warheads will not be then recycled to produce new warheads, but rather be placed under the IAEA safeguards and eventually disposed of, and there were several kind of initiatives to that effect at the time. Then in 2010, at the NPT Review Conference, again, the language on the importance of irreversibility, along with verifiability and transparency, got reaffirmed in the 2010 Action Plan. But at the time, without much elaboration on the actual meaning of irreversibility, it kind of became a package with transparency and verifiability. After that, the government of Switzerland commissioned 2 studies to further examine the concept. One conducted by Vertic looked at the technical aspects, and another one conducted by CPRI examined political and legal aspects of irreversibility in nuclear disarmament. Then the interest died down for a while, and then in recent years, once again, received attention, especially from the United Kingdom, Norway, and then later from the United States, who led kind of the push to fund new studies, to conduct events and conferences, diving deeper into the meaning of irreversibility for nuclear disarmament. And so one of those studies was conducted by the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation and is being presented today. What's the approach that the VCDNP took, and Noah will dive deeper into it. But as our starting point, we looked at the conclusions from the Vertic study of 2011. They looked at the technical aspects and concluded that certainly in complete terms, in absolute terms, complete irreversibility is impossible if we're only looking at it from a technical perspective. You can dismantle everything and dispose of everything, but the capability to rebuild is always there. There is always a possibility of rebuild, and it becomes the matter of the cost, political, financial, etc. So taking that and the idea that irreversibility is not really an absolute end state, but a spectrum, the study was asking what is the balance between going as far down as possible down the technical kind of spectrum, what is the role of and the feasibility of those measures, and what is the role of political, legal, and other factors balancing out together with the technical ones to provide assurances that nuclear disarmament measures would indeed be not reversed in the future. So to conduct the study, we had a very good team. 2 of the co-authors are here with us today presenting. The third one was Dr. Adam Bernstein, who could not be here in Vienna today. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Noah Mayhew, our Mr. Safeguards at the center, who will present main findings of the study before the comments from Dr. Nikolai Sokov. Noah, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gaukhar, and thank all of you for being here today, both in person and online. Before I get into the subject of the report that I wish we had paper copies for you here today, but please take note of the QR code that will be on the screen in just a moment. I would be remiss if I did not thank the V Fund of the U.S. Department of State for the generous support that supported this project. So here's our QR code. It's a rather bulky report. You may also have noticed that there are briefs on irreversibility as a sort of primer for negotiation that are also available to you here in person and on our website. So as Gaukhar alluded, there's been increased interest in recent years in further developing the principle of irreversibility in nuclear disarmament. Gaukhar mentioned some of the great work that has been done on this topic in the relatively recent past, and through this work, it has become generally accepted that irreversibility, as Gaukhar mentioned, on purely technical terms is not possible. It's always possible given time, effort, money, and a willingness to endure international backlash to reconstitute a weapons program. And also, as Gaukhar pointed out, it's been generally accepted that irreversibility should be presented as a potential spectrum of end states rather than one singular destination. So, if we accept that on technical terms, irreversibility is not possible, what tools can one consider to provide sufficient confidence that a particular step along the path to disarmament is not being reversed? What are the technical and legal measures that can be implemented? What political steps can be taken, and what normative momentum can be built to make steps in disarmament as irreversible as possible? And then finally, how feasible are those actions to take at various steps on the path to disarmament? And these were the questions that really drove the study. Understanding the balance of confidence on one hand and feasibility on the other in irreversible nuclear disarmament. Gaukhar already touched on sort of the history of the irreversibility principle. It has its roots in US-Russian arms control, and the term irreversibility has lived in the NPT context, as she said, since 2000. Now, for the purpose of the study, we really wanted the results to be driven by NPT states parties' views themselves. To this end, we conducted 16 off-the-record consultations with NPT states parties officials, including at the 2024 Preparatory Committee meeting. The insights that we gleaned from these consultations were supplemented by the results of a targeted anonymous survey. 3 of the 5 nuclear weapon states and 14 non-nuclear weapon states responded to the survey. To inform the approach to the questions that we asked, we worked, as Gaukhar pointed out, with a technical expert, Dr. Adam Bernstein, to develop 9 technical steps in the disarmament process, and this drew, as she said, inspiration from previous research. This is everything from the very most basic steps one could take at the beginning, sort of removal of warheads from delivery systems, things of that nature, all the way through, if you think about what gives you irreversibility, or the confidence in it, all the way through the destruction of all highly enriched uranium and plutonium production facilities. So we wanted to really give the spectrum of what is at least technically possible. These 9 steps, and you can read about this more in the report, include estimates of the technical difficulty for the disarming state to reverse each step, as well as the difficulty for counterparties to verify that the step has been achieved. Again, I'm not going to go down the list for the sake of time, but you can see in the report in some detail what each of the 9 steps might entail. So here's the blueprint of the rest of the presentation today. First, I'd like to discuss some of my general observations from the 2 years of work that went into this project. Then I would like to talk through some of the survey results, and then I'll discuss recommendations for the project. So, general observations. There were some things that survey respondents and those we consulted with agreed about, and other things that they did not agree about. Most of these general observations are on points on which there was broad agreement. First, based on the discussions that we had, we prioritized our analysis in building confidence on the disarmament process rather than defining a specific end state. And in addition to sort of this idea of a spectrum that I mentioned a moment ago, the answers that respondents were able to give us, they were much more comfortable talking about sort of what is the process of getting to a destination rather than predetermining what a disarmed world would look like. And I think that that will continue to be true as this principle evolves. Second, we started this process with the idea that we would discuss very specific normative legal considerations that affect confidence and feasibility in irreversible nuclear disarmament, but found, again from the consultations that we did as well, that trying to artificially categorize political, legal, and normative considerations was sort of unhelpful, and that in a world where we are approaching large-scale disarmament, these factors would not only have a lot of overlap, but the context in which we get there will involve very specific combinations of these things. Third, most of the respondents that we were able to get data from supported sort of political measures as a source of confidence in sort of the early stages in disarmament, but viewed legally binding verifiable agreements as essential for what a lasting maintenance of a disarmed world might look like across any given end state that you can think of. And we specifically asked them, do you still think if this makes disarmament in the near term less feasible? And across nuclear and non-nuclear weapon states, that was generally the consensus. Fourth general observation, the non-nuclear weapon states that we spoke to showed quite a bit of flexibility regarding the form of any given agreement, including who's party to it, how far verification would go, and who the actors are involved in monitoring in the early stages. A couple of non-nuclear weapon states actually straight up said to me, with reference to the slow pace of disarmament, just do something, basically to get the ball rolling. Fifth, we asked states parties, and this is one of my favorite sort of pet issues, about the cost of disarmament. Who should pay and at what stage during the disarmament process? There were some views that respondents gave to us that I'll get into in a moment, but the bottom line is there are no clear answers today as to what that might look like. This was one point, not of disagreement, but of mutual unsureness, as I'll discuss in a moment. And then the last general observation, most of the people that we spoke to agreed that the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, has some role in disarmament verification, but opinions really differed strongly, and this is one point of disagreement, on the extent of the IAEA's involvement, the feasibility of the IAEA being involved in certain steps, and whether or not the IAEA has the necessary mandate and legal authority. So that's sort of the broad picture. So let's get into the survey responses. We divided the survey into 5 categories, trying to really zone in on certain aspects of irreversibility and states' views there too. We looked at activities in disarmament, legal and normative aspects of disarmament, obstacles to disarmament, be they political or otherwise, the cost, and again, the actors. I'm going to go through just one question per category, but bear in mind how difficult this was to boil down into 20-25 minutes. After 2 years of research, we asked 29 questions, so bear with me. So, starting with activities in nuclear disarmament. As I noted, there were some things that people we spoke to agreed with broadly, and there was some disagreement across nuclear and non-nuclear weapon states. Broadly, both groups agreed that in matters of process, how do we look at the steps of getting to a disarming world, they agreed on many of those things, but they had different motivations for getting there. The sentiment was described, like I said a moment ago, by more than one non-nuclear weapon state is just do something. And sort of getting us to the same place, but from a different perspectives. One of the nuclear weapon states I spoke to said, we would be happy to move forward if only the other side would as well. I'll let you do that what you will. One example of this, and this is the statistic you see on the screen, we asked respondents what the level of commitment, political, legal without verification, or legal with verification, would provide confidence that each of the disarmament steps was being maintained. Non-nuclear weapon state respondents largely preferred legally binding treaties with verification, especially for the dismantlement of military enrichment and reprocessing facilities. Some across the spectrum were a touch more flexible for some of the early stages, like removing warheads from delivery systems or stopping work in weapons-related national laboratories. One non-nuclear weapon state official emphasized that confidence just between the nuclear weapon states alone was not sufficient because, a global zero reality would impact the entire international community. So that's non-nuclear weapon states, but similarly, most nuclear weapon state respondents also favored illegally binding, verifiable treaties, although one nuclear weapon state we spoke to would accept a political commitment for stopping weaponization-related activities in laboratories. Broadly, while political commitments were seen as helpful interim steps, both groups generally saw a binding agreement as the ultimate goal. So that's actors in nuclear disarmament. We also looked at legal and normative aspects. And so here's one example of a normative aspect on the screen. While there was agreement between the nuclear and non-nuclear weapon states across regional groupings on some issues, the disagreements are more likely to be what we debate as we move closer to disarmament, and this is one of them. We asked respondents about the confidence provided by the fulfillment of past commitments, including the 12 practical steps agreed at the 2000 NPT Review Conference and the 64-point action plan from the 2010 NPT Review Conference. Non-nuclear weapon states unanimously responded that the fulfillment of these past commitments would increase the confidence that nuclear weapon states were pursuing irreversible nuclear disarmament. 2 of the 3 nuclear weapon states disagreed or strongly disagreed with that sentiment, although one did agree about the necessity of fulfilling past commitments. One sort of nice nugget from the consultations, one non-nuclear weapon state official that we spoke to really pointedly said that these commitments from 2000 and 2010 were not past commitments, but rather existing commitments, which would need to be honored. Another non-nuclear weapon state said that while states parties might review these things to determine if they were still current, this shouldn't be viewed as a parallel track to the NPT review cycle or working towards disarmament itself. Several of the non-nuclear weapon states we spoke to said that in order to be credible, any new commitments would have to be substantively accountable. Now, interestingly, one nuclear weapon state did say that they would like to see these commitments reaffirmed. So there is a bit of deconvergence, on that issue, even between nuclear weapon states. Obstacles to disarmament. It's something that I know non-nuclear weapon states don't especially like to hear about. Based on the work we did with member states, states parties going into this project, there was confirmation of the broadly shared view that nuclear disarmament is a long, complex, and probably non-linear process. Something I should emphasize, we give you these 9 steps. This does not mean they're 1, 2, 3. Things would likely be happening at the same time. Everyone we spoke to, nuclear weapon states, non-nuclear weapon states, acknowledged that the political environment determined the feasibility of disarmament and that this was key to ensuring confidence in irreversibility. But several of the non-nuclear weapon states followed up on this point by saying, well, the political environment shouldn't affect the feasibility of disarmament, and in some cases in the past, it hasn't. Sort of along this vein, one of the issues that we asked about was whether nuclear disarmament should be pursued step by step while preserving strategic stability at each stage. And this is something that has been rather contentious in the NPT context. I see a few of you who have been involved laughing at this. And this contention was reflected in the responses that we got. About half of the non-nuclear weapon states agreed with the sentiment, which I found interesting. Over a third disagreed. One non-nuclear weapon state was unsure. Now, we asked for written responses to this question as well, and one of the non-nuclear weapon states, several of them actually, largely expressed skepticism about the concept of strategic stability itself, characterizing it as inherently subjective and intended to prevent steps towards disarmament. All of the nuclear weapon state respondents agreed that disarmament should in fact be pursued step by step while preserving strategic stability. Although interestingly, one of the nuclear weapon states we talked to clarified that they viewed the goal as preservation of mutual confidence between disarming states rather than this conventional understanding of strategic stability. So again, interesting bit of deconvergence there. In terms of who's involved in disarmament verification, who are the actors? Who should conduct verification activities? We asked which of the disarmament steps could be verified, for example, by the IAEA, which by a new multilateral verification body, which of them between the disarming states themselves, and maybe which of them wouldn't require verification at all. Most of the non-nuclear weapon state respondents wanted either the IAEA or some sort of new body to be involved in this, especially as we get closer to the later stages where we're talking about large-scale dismantlement of production facilities and things like that. The non-nuclear weapon states we spoke to also believed that the IAEA could, or already has rather, or could develop the capacity for disarmament verification, citing experiences like the disarmament of South Africa. Even among the non-nuclear weapon states, though, some respondents said, well, the IAEA should avoid sensitive dismantlement activities. Others felt that the IAEA could take part in all dismantlement and disarmament steps if proper protections for weapons-sensitive information were in place. So there's quite a bit of unsureness there, even among non-nuclear weapon states. The nuclear weapon states, as they have in the past, preferred state-to-state verification. 2 of the 3 nuclear weapon states we spoke to said the IAEA could be involved for fissile material and production facility dismantlement, which is something that it already has experience in. One of the nuclear weapon states emphasized the IAEA's role would be important where it has the historical experience, so fissile material verification. And another said, without any reservations, the IAEA does not have the mandate. Any involvement of the IAEA in any sort of disarmament verification work would need to be designated by an agreement that asks the agency to take on this role. My favorite issue, cost. And again, we get to a part where we're not sure how the people we spoke to, are not sure how this should be done. One of the major considerations in figuring out what we think is feasible and providing confidence in irreversibility is which countries are going to pay for disarmament verification, at which point in the disarmament process. 2/3 of the non-nuclear weapon states that we spoke to said that disarming countries alone should bear the cost of disarmament verification and monitoring. A third was not sure. On the other hand, 2 of the 3 surveyed nuclear weapon states were themselves unsure about whether the cost of disarmament should be borne by them themselves, the sort of, polluters pay principle, I think it's called. And one of them said, no, nuclear weapon states, this is not only our responsibility, this is a shared one. So that's cost, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a second. I'll give you sort of my conclusions for the project, and then I'll stop throwing statistics at you. The principle of irreversibility, as Gaukhar mentioned at the beginning, has received a lot of attention in recent years, in particular in further developing or finding ways to implement the concept. But that interest seems to be waning, would be my personal observation, as the situation in the NPT review process gets more intense and more tense. As sort of the nuclear governance architecture comes under increasing strain, NPT states parties are going to have to decide how much priority they placed on having ready solutions when it comes to what we think of as irreversibility for implementation. A couple of things that NPT states parties might decide to do. First, building upon a previous review conference consensus final document language, NPT states parties could encourage individual countries to develop their own policy positions on the principle of irreversibility, including what it means for them in concrete terms. NPT states parties could pledge further support, including financial support, for initiatives like the International Partnership for Nuclear Disarmament Verification, to continue the work that they have been doing on finding technical solutions for disarmament verification between nuclear and non-nuclear weapon states. And then third, NPT states parties could acknowledge and further support the work of non-governmental organizations to continue exploring this issue, especially through informal channels, to make the principle of irreversibility as concrete and tangible as possible within the NPT review process and indeed beyond. Looking at institutions. Nuclear disarmament will require strong institutional support, especially on verification activities, and opinions are divided as to whether this should be entrusted to the IAEA or whether there is a new international body that is required to support this mission, or maybe a mix. Without any doubt, verification with respect to fissile material after completion of the disarmament process is more or less what the IAEA does with fissile material today. But there are also steps outside of fissile material that would be required to provide confidence in irreversibility. In any event, even if the IAEA were to become the main verification body, member states would have to agree on what that mandate is. The safeguard system would need to be adapted to the new state of affairs, and appropriate funding would have to be allocated. Just a word on the role of the IAEA. In a world more moving towards disarmament, states parties in the IAEA would maybe need to embrace a shift in perspective or perhaps in culture about what the agency's role is within its mandate here. The idea, the notion that the IAEA lacks the authority to contribute to disarmament verification does not align with its foundational purpose. While the agency's past work in this area has primarily been retrospective and supported by weaponization experts in the Secretariat, its mandate is ultimately defined by the will of its member states. No more, no less. NPT states parties and the IAEA member states may choose not to involve the IAEA in these activities, but it would not be accurate, in my view, to suggest that it inherently can't do it. The cost bit. No matter when we sort of see progress on nuclear disarmament, verification is going to cost money. Whether it's conducted in part or wholly by the IAEA, new verification body, or between disarming states, we should be prepared with a menu of options for costing disarmament based on previous experience, including arms control and by the IAEA itself. Even if the IAEA is tasked with any part of disarmament verification, the agency's budget would need to grow commensurately with the demands placed on its services. I would refer you to the document in this particular respect, gov/inf/1999/9. There have been discussions on potential costing options in the past. Just two more points, and I close up. The echoes of a weapons program, something that I didn't talk about in the presentation, but would be a sticky problem moving forward. No matter how disarmament takes place, scientists are going to retain the knowledge relevant for weaponization, or at minimum, the ability to easily regain that kind of knowledge. So work should commence now on identification of plausible pathways to redirect this group of scientists towards peaceful nuclear or other activities, taking advantage of their expertise in nuclear physics, engineering, and so on. And you can look at things like the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program for inspiration on this. There's been in the discourse on irreversibility this long discussion about a common definition or a shared vision. And in principle, while in diplomatic negotiations definitions are important, our study has revealed that discussions about a common vision or a shared definition have diminishing returns. Despite the many definitions that have been developed, what irreversibility means will be decided at the negotiating table by parties to a concrete agreement or treaty. And so trying to ascribe a universally agreed definition to irreversibility might even be counterproductive. And then lastly, this balance between irreversibility, transparency, and verifiability that Gaukhar referred to in the beginning. There's been a lot of work that's gone into trying to understand the balance between these three things. And my view is kind of with as with a common definition or shared vision, while it's important conceptually, there are diminishing returns on having this conversation. It's my view that the degree of transparency and irreversibility are considerations that drive the frequency, intensity, intrusiveness, and even the desirability of verification measures. I could go on, but I think I'll spare you. Please take a very long look at the study. I have brought the QR code back, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Noah. And before you dive into the publication, following the QR code, I'm going to pass the floor to Nikolai, if he's still up for it. Dr. Nikolai Sokov is an arms control expert, having directly participated in some of the arms control negotiations between the United States and back then the Soviet Union and subsequently Russia, including the START I agreement. Nikolai also participated in this study and will provide his commentary before we open the floor for questions. Nikolai, please.
Thank you, Gaukhar. Yes, indeed, actually, there is a big difference between arms control and disarmament. Yes, I can attest to that. So it's one thing when you try kind of to stabilize the strategic relationship, but you find yourself in a completely different world when you think about complete elimination of nuclear weapons. As a personal note, I must say that when I came to Austria the first time in 2011, I felt strange. It was the first time that I lived in a country that did not have nuclear weapons. And that was weird.
Did you feel unsafe?
No, it was like unusual. I was missing something. They were so used to, yes, and there were really no people with whom I could discuss, well, you know, the nuclear posture and other interesting things. So anyway, for me, actually, looking at disarmament, at irreversible disarmament was a way kind of to bring together the arms control experience and the long-term goal of eliminating nuclear weapons. Yes, and by the way, even when I was doing arms control, I never actually lost sight that the end goal should be the elimination of nuclear weapons. So the good news about that survey and consultations that we had is that the principle of irreversibility is now very deeply ingrained in the international discussion of nuclear disarmament. Yes, that's very important. Including in the context of the NPT. In fact, the NPT review process has emerged as the key international forum for the discussion of nuclear disarmament and irreversibility, which is only right because you cannot really talk about Article 6 if you do not think about the more kind of practical aspects like the reversibility of nuclear disarmament. Understanding that elimination of nuclear weapons is actually not enough. You need to do much more to make sure that they don't come back. So that's good news. The survey and the consultations that we have, however, have demonstrated that the views on the practical implementation of that principle will actually vary quite widely. Yes, there is no consensus about the specific meaning of that principle, which in my view means that the discussion on the contents, on the substance of irreversibility should now proceed to the next stage, to a new stage, of the stage that will address practicalities of nuclear disarmament. I don't really think that we need kind of to convince ourselves that nuclear disarmament should be irreversible. We all agree on that, but what it actually means is something that needs very close attention, in my view, and we need more debates, we need more studies to better understand the practicalities and especially the trade-offs that are associated with the main principle, reversibility, but also verification and transparency, as actually Noah discussed in his presentation. Or perhaps we need to utilize track 1.5 more than before to enhance and deepen the knowledge of all aspects of these kind of principles. Now that we all support the principle of the in-depth knowledge and understanding so vital when the international community can actually begin practical discussion of nuclear disarmament. We do need to engage in that discussion with open eyes, fully understanding what we're talking about, what are the costs and what are the trade-offs, and I would like to emphasize the trade-offs. That's something that has rarely been fully understood. I suppose at least that's what the survey and consultations shows, at least to me. The emphasis in the new stage of the debate needs to be on the feasibility. Well, it's really tempting to shoot for maximum irreversibility, maximum verification, maximum transparency. Yes, and we can all agree that that's really good, but we also need to be aware of the trade-offs. But at the very least, between the depth of irreversibility or verification and the costs understood within a broad kind of sense. It's not only the monetary costs, but it's also the changes, the cuts in the industrial infrastructure, the political costs, the organizational burdens, and so on and so forth. We need to understand what each option entails. One of the options, for example, that we used to understand one kind of possible goals is complete end to nuclear power. Will the international community be ready to accept it? Can we bear the costs of that? Well, there are many options to implement irreversibility. It can be deeper or more shallow. Verification can be highly intrusive or very light, and so on and so forth. Yes, each option does have its own benefits and costs. For example, when we try to reach for the maximum, this might actually result in a failure of the effort because it will be difficult, perhaps impossible to negotiate. And indeed, some countries might just object to the notion that they have to stop nuclear power production. On the other hand, it may be quite easy to negotiate very light irreversibility and very light verification. Shooting for the minimalistic approach may be quite easy to negotiate, but such an arrangement is likely to be unstable and short-lived, yes, and we might actually see a very high kind of risk that nuclear weapons may return. So we need to search for the golden middle. And it's not easy, but now that we have a consensus on the principle, we do need to start filling the broad notions with more kind of substance. It's also time to begin to seriously contemplate the organizational aspects of verification. First and foremost, who will implement it? Nuclear weapon states or broader community, the IAEA, or a new dedicated organization. How long should verification regime last? 10 years, 20 years, forever? We do need to understand, once again, all the trade-offs and the costs and benefits, and so on and so forth. We do have some experience, in fact, with implementation of arms control treaties, and if that experience shows anything, there is no simple and straightforward answer. So we do need to discuss that, yes, and we need to understand all the aspects. Next, past cases of irreversibility in the context of arms control. And the study does look into the past cases very, very, very closely to understand the lessons. So these past cases have conclusively demonstrated that the final decision on the practical meaning of all the key principles the decision on the specific provisions is always made at the negotiating table by the parties who sit at the negotiating table. So I think there is one lesson here. If states want to affect the practical outcome, they need to be at the table. If you entrust, for example, negotiations to nuclear weapon states, don't be surprised that decision will be made by the nuclear weapon states, and the non-nuclear states will just stay like outside, yes, and will have to take whatever is given to them. But of course, when you sit at the table, you also bear a lot of responsibility and costs and so on and so forth. That's something that has to be understood as well. And finally, we need to think about a broader picture, the shape of the international security system that would actually weaken, well, hopefully remove, but at least weaken the rationale for keeping nuclear weapons and the use and force in general. As we think about nuclear disarmament, I think we need to understand that there are two ways to achieve nuclear disarmament. Yes, and the first way is what we've been all discussing for years. We somehow agree on elimination of nuclear weapons, and we eliminate nuclear weapons, and then we maintain the verification system to make sure that they don't come back. But we should always be mindful that there is the alternative way to nuclear disarmament. Yes, and the humankind can simply come up with more terrible weapons, yes, and then nuclear weapons will simply fade away because they'll be unnecessary. Look at the fate of chemical weapons. Everyone feared them in 1920s, right? Yes, we had a convention, stuff like that. Well, they're not really a war-fighting tool today. Yes, we don't like them, but they're not really as terrible as nuclear weapons. So I think we need to think about eliminating nuclear weapons before they are replaced with something else. And we need to shape the international system so that nothing more terrible comes into being. They need to be eliminated by a conscious decision of the international community, and to do that, we both need to create conditions, and we need to understand the practicalities of nuclear disarmament to make sure that we do not see nuclear weapons ever coming back. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikolai.
The short comments.
Yes, thank you to both presenters. I think there are several points and kind of trends that come through both presentations, particularly on the issue of trade-offs, that we generally understand that there will be trade-offs involved between the scope of the disarmament measures and the complexity of the verification and the cost of it and the involvement of non-nuclear weapon states, but these haven't been discussed in depth in the international fora, and it remains an open question whether it's particularly helpful to have a more in-depth discussion in the NPT context at this point, or whether that might prove only more divisive or kind of an off-ramp from the discussion about starting the disarmament process to begin with. And then there are some factors that are technical that we can discuss with relative degree of confidence what steps would be needed, and Noah listed a number of them: the removal of warheads from the delivery systems, dismantlement of warheads, dismantlement of facilities. And then there are factors that are much harder to describe and take into account, quantify, and some of these that Nikolai mentioned, the general kind of state of relations between disarming states, the record of compliance and implementation of previous agreements, or the implementation of NPT commitments. How do these factors play into the confidence about the irreversibility of nuclear disarmament? So these are some of the takeaways for me, but I am not the I'm not in the role of discussant here. I'm in the role of opening the floor for questions. And before I invite questions from the participants here in person, I would like to remind those of you who are joining us online that you can ask your questions using the Q&A function in Zoom, and they will be transmitted here and read out. But first, to those who have actually made it to the 13th floor of Andromeda Tower, the floor is open. Yes, please, Ambassador Hainotsi. Wait for the microphone, and once you get the microphone, please introduce yourselves, even if we know you.
Thank you, Gaukhar. My name is Thomas Hainotsi. I'm a retired Austrian disarmament diplomat, and first of all, I really want to commend Noah and, of course, also Nikolai for a very interesting introduction. And I think now most of us really want to read a study, so thank you for that. I have a rather fundamental question. What do you think is the function of discussing irreversibility of nuclear disarmament now? I mean, you hear different voices. So some people say, I mean, now things are so bad, we should concentrate on what is going on and not discuss something which will be important in the long run. But now we have more urgent concerns. You also hear voices that say, well, this might be somehow right, but it's one of the very few issues on which the civilized debate in the framework of the NPT process is still possible, and there's a kind of positive spirit from all sides in these discussions and so on. So just for the sake of saving the NPT, it would be good that we really put more weight on this subject in the next years. You can, of course, also question, it is an issue that is somewhere in the future, rather far out in the future, and the circumstances then might be totally different from the circumstances in which we live now. And I mean, it's always mentioned, and I think you do it too, I mean, there has to be a societal change because we don't see the nuclear weapon states today being willing to give up nuclear weapons, and so a certain kind of change of mind, enlightenment, whatever, would be necessary in order to get there, which I think would shift a lot the whole landscape and what we really need in order to verify how much forthcoming nuclear weapons might be to see an independent verification, because the verification just among a handful of countries, I think there are some problems there in credibility and so on. So this is my question, the functioning, and may I just add to the very thoughtful remarks that Nikolai just gave. Yes, there are these two possibilities, but the third one, I fear, is that nuclear weapons would explode, and it would have such a devastating effect that perhaps those who survive will understand that these weapons, they are self-destructive and don't have a place in the new world that we would see then. So there is always a less optimistic scenario, I fear, than the one that Nikolai gave. But thank you so much.
Thank you. Perhaps I'll take one more question from the audience before I turn it to... before I turn back to the speakers.
Thank you, Vera Moisin from UNODA. I had one question on the cost survey question. Was there any difference in whether within these disarming countries, is that also including, for example, umbrella states or nuclear sharing states? And is there any different views on whether they should be sharing the cost, or is it also people under the TPNW, for example, or states under the TPNW? And then secondly, I know that the study, is primarily focused on NPT and IAEA. I wonder if there was any consideration on involvement of nuclear armed states outside these structures and how they can be involved in thinking about irreversibility and working towards nuclear disarmament, given that, as you said, nuclear weapon states say, yes, I'll do it if my nuclear power peers do it as well. So of course they need to be involved. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we have enough to chew on right now. Any volunteers to address first? Okay, Noah.
Sure. So thank you both for your questions. Sort of the fundamental reason for why discuss now. It's a fair question. The progress under Article 6 has gone nowhere for a frighteningly long period of time, and one could be tempted to view the resurrection of the discussion on irreversibility as sort of something nice to talk about. But I don't take quite as cynical a look on that as some others might. You can certainly make the argument that, as you say, having, at least there's something we can have a civilized debate on is a conversation worth having. I think that when it comes to things like sort of the nitty-gritty of what maintaining a disarmed world would look like, whatever that looks like, sometimes it's worth the exercise in and of itself. I was in New York for half of the NPT preparatory committee meeting a couple of weeks ago, and having a civilized conversation about any part of the NPT's 3 pillars would be, I think, it's an exercise worth having to remind ourselves as why the treaty itself is so important. The other thing I would say on that particular issue is the issues that we've described in the study are not unique to the NPT. They are not unique to nuclear disarmament. These things crop up everywhere. I mean, talk about the 2 sort of big, to me, outstanding questions. What do you do with the echoes of a weapons program, and what do you do about costing nuclear disarmament? That's true for arms control, and that's true for arms control outside of nuclear. That's true for any work the IAEA has done in this particular vein. So I think that an understanding of them in the irreversibility context is also a useful metric for looking at other contexts in which these issues might pop up. And the last thing, sort of to answer your question, is I think it's worth reminding ourselves as to the successes that we have had in the past. Let's say it's 2074 when we start truly moving towards a disarming world. Well, we have plenty of examples that we've described in the study about the success of the US-Russia IAEA trilateral initiative in finding ways to get rid of nuclear material from weapons programs without endangering classified properties. And there's many, many others, but I think that if we don't continue to talk about these successes in the not so distant past, then we risk forgetting these examples when we might need to apply them. Costs, who said what? I must regretfully tell you we didn't ask anyone which country they were from. We did look at which UN regional grouping they were from, and the cost problem really, I think, it was difficult for anyone to answer because, as I sort of mentioned at the beginning, it's so far in the future that we're just not quite sure what costing is going to look like, and we're also not sure as the circumstances will be to which we come to a disarming world, right? Does it matter if there is some sort of version of forcible disarmament in terms of who ends up paying? When non-nuclear weapon states see progress that they're more satisfied with, are they more willing to pay? There was a general there was general support for non-nuclear weapon states paying into such a scheme at some point. But it just seems, I think, to the people we spoke to, so far-flung that people just weren't quite too... Everyone agreed that it's important, but, what do we do with it? Lastly, non-NPT states, again, good question. this is less of an us and more of a we. I thought it was at this juncture more practical, considering that this language lives in the NPT context so much, to focus on that. But it's a fair question, and if when we come to the point of approaching a disarming world, then of course the non-NPT states would not only have to be involved but have buy-in.
Thank you. Nikolai, did you want to come in?
Yes, I'll just answer the first question, I think. Well, I think it's never too early to get prepared. Just imagine 5 years from now, the political environment is right to seriously contemplate nuclear disarmament, yes, and then suddenly, oh, by the way, what it does involve, let's begin a debate. Yes, and debates will take another kind of 10 years. So yes, I think that it's never too late, never too early. Yes, and we need to address that now so that when the opportunity emerges, we are ready and we understand what should be done. And looking in the past, we had, I think, a very good opportunity, well, maybe not to eliminate nuclear weapons, but at least to move much further. That was in the 90s and in the early, especially 2000s. Unfortunately, the reasonably stable and positive international environment had the opposite effect. Too many people and countries thought that even arms control is no longer needed. Yes, everything is so good, why even think about that? So yes, and now we kind of we face the consequences of that to some extent. So yes, I would say that we need to keep thinking about that. We need to keep debating, and we need to keep to lay plans and understand what should be done.
I thought there was, yes, please. There's another question from the floor.
Hi, Paulina Keim, IAEA. So I'm really excited to fully read the rest of the report, but it seems like an underlying assumption that irreversibility is positive for disarmament. But as you made the distinction, disarmament and arms control are different. Is there any benefit to reversibility in arms control? In the deterrence community, some have purported the idea that if there is a more resilient and modern enterprise, they might be more willing to take steps to do things on the top of the list, such as remove warheads from delivery platforms as a way of, as you quote, do something. Is there any benefit to that? Or would you say that irreversibility is crucial to arms control as well? Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Dr. Siri, please.
Thank you. My name is Petra Seibert. I'm a member of the TPNW Scientific Advisory Group and of the Austrian delegation to CTBTO Working Group B. Thank you for your presentation. There are so many interesting topics, but I have to take out one, and the one I would like to put on the table is the role of CTBTO, because I was a little bit surprised that it was not even mentioned. And I would think that having a test ban in place and the capacity to monitor it would be a relevant element of irreversibility. And I think it's also an example where we can discuss the issue of cost and of for how long we would want to have verification systems in place and so on. And in that case, I would argue that the monitoring system built by the CTBTO PrepCom has a big civilian value as well, and this will not disappear. And maybe just like the emphasis on for what we want that system, it would gradually shift, and maybe it could, thanks to its technical infrastructure, even assume some more tasks, be it civilian or also in the context of verification when we think about plutonium separation and the possibility to remotely monitor radioactive effluents from that process.
Thank you. I think I'm going to turn to the speakers now. I think we have a couple of good questions.
Sure, just on the the prospect of, is there a benefit to reversibility? Well, I'm not sure benefit is quite the word that I would use, but sort of one of the big premises of the study, right, is what is the confidence versus feasibility of taking a step towards nuclear disarmament? And you can make the argument, as we have in the final product, that particularly early on in the process, if something is a little bit more reversible, it might be a little easier for a state to accept. I would say certainly on the way to a broadly disarming world, there is some value in that. I think that there is a limited shelf life, though, if the idea is sort of a broadly disarming world. As I try not to prognosticate too much, but I can imagine a situation in which earlier steps, yes, okay, they can be easily reversed, and take a look at the technical description in the final study. But you know, from the sense that I get from the consultations and the survey is, if we're talking about like no more military HEU and production facilities, no more plutonium reprocessing facilities, that non-nuclear weapon states would not be happy with a world in which that's easily reversed. One example that I would give on that, actually, that is applicable today, I think 15 or so years ago, more, France dismantled one of its, I think, military processing facilities and a nuclear test site. They basically said, this is irreversible. And everyone was like, great. Now, if you speak to French diplomats, and when I say great, I don't mean that sarcastically. People are like, great, okay, that's wonderful news. And if you speak to the French government, they'll say, well, yes, in order to build this back up, it would cost a gargantuan amount of money. It would be technically very difficult. We'd have to start from scratch. So reversibility has a shelf life, but it's I don't think it's the end state, and so that is what I'll say about that. Oh, and I also wanted to say the same is true for a withdrawal clause. Every treaty has a withdrawal clause. That you could think of that almost as a legal sense of reversibility that almost no state that I can think of would accept in a legally binding treaty. You've got to be able to get out. So it's never all one thing or the other. On the CTBTO, I disagree with nothing that you said. I think that all makes perfect sense. I would characterize a test ban in place, in addition to everything that you said in terms of civilian value and long-term verification and monitoring, as additionally contributing to sort of the general environment in which people would perhaps be willing to take other sort of more intrusive steps, noting that a ban treaty, a verifiable ban treaty is in force. Let's get the CTBTO in force, guys.
Nikolai, the reversibility of arms control steps as enabler?
This might actually be true at first glance. But as a practitioner, I can tell you that you never feel comfortable when you know that steps are, the steps in elimination or conversion, say, of delivery platforms can be quite easily actually reversible. We do have, in fact, with an example, in Start 1, where conversion of strategic bombers from nuclear weapons to conventional weapons is actually quite, not easily maybe going back, but, it's kind of feasible. And that remains. And Start 1 was in force 15 years, yes, and it remained a serious kind of problem, at least political, problem, throughout all these kind of 15 years, right? Yes, and the only consolation was that, okay, it cannot happen very quickly. So yes, it will take several months, yes, and it'll be possible to detect it, but nonetheless, I would rather say that everything being equal, that issue could have actually derailed the conclusion of the treaty. So yes, I would say that reversibility is something that favors arms control is a very questionable actual notion. Yes, it's a very theoretical kind of notion, but in practice that I think is more likely to actually stall arms control. So yes, on the IMS, yes, so I fully agree with you. That said, just a short kind of caution note, some verification systems may yield themselves very, very well to additional kind of civilian uses. Some might not. That said, the fact that some verification kind of system or some measure cannot be also used for civilian kind of purposes, I think it's not a reason not to accept and implement it. You know, so after all, we're talking about nuclear disarmament, and yes, that's, I think, much more important than anything else. But yes, I fully support kind of your point that you can actually yield some benefits and thus can reduce the costs of nuclear disarmament and subsequent verification. Yes.
Thank you. We did receive some questions from the audience, and Louis, our colleague, has an enviable task of summarizing them into one.
Yeah, so we did get quite a few. I'm just going to go through them, and you can pick them off the menu as you like. Very quickly. One question was, were there any objections to having a new dedicated multilateral body to do the verification of irreversible disarmament? What were the opinions voiced on that? Another question was about comparing or taking into consideration the cost of applying safeguards in disarmed nuclear weapon states, in addition to the cost of verification of the disarmament process. And one particular question was about those states denying a role for the IAEA in the disarmament process. What was their reasoning for doing so? So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Louis. Okay, each pick one question that you really want to address of the ones that Louis gave us.
I think 1 and 3 actually lend themselves to one answer. Objection to any new body, not really, in terms of sort of thoughtful answers to the survey, but when discussing who should implement verification, the sense that I got from the respondents was that it doesn't make any sense for a new organization to be founded to do what the IAEA already does and have 57 times how decades and decades of experience doing. There's no need to duplicate that effort. The only sort of however moment there, why would you not want the IAEA to serve in this role, is the concern was that the agency doesn't have the amount of resources, and that touches on number 2. My answer to that is the agency has needed a real terms budget increase for decades, and so you look at a broadly disarming world, the IAEA will need more money. And that's particularly true in a world where all of the current nuclear weapon states have their entire stockpile of fissile material under safeguards. That is a gargantuan amount of material. The agency would need more money. I could go on for a very long time about all of that, but that's, I think, what I'll leave it at.
Any particularly great arguments of why IAEA should not be involved?
Well, the concern was that you can imagine who these arguments came from, but the concern was that it would distract from the IAEA's neutral mandate now in sort of applying safeguards as we understand them today. And then the other sort of concern that was expressed was the agency's access to proliferation-sensitive information. And to that, again, I would say, well, the agency has experience in dealing with what looks very much like what disarmament verification could look like without getting access to proliferation-sensitive information. That would have to be scaled up profoundly in a broadly disarming world, and I'm not arguing with that, but I'll reiterate something I said earlier. To say the agency can't serve in this role is not the same as the member states saying we don't want the IAEA to serve in this role. And the member states may say they don't want the IAEA to serve in this role, but it's got the technical capabilities, and given the resources, I think it could do it.
No, I think we can move to some concluding points. Anything you'd like the viewers and the participants here to take away from this presentation in particular?
Yes, in fact, I'm going to read from the very end of the report. One of the things that we were told in consultations, I don't have the quote, I'll just say it. One of the things that we were told during consultations is something to the effect of, it may take the ingenuity of complete fools to get us over the line. Don't question what is possible based on what we've done before. The past has examples that we must draw on, but don't look at the prospect of a disarming world as completely foolhardy, because we don't know what the context that we're going to be having this conversation is in 5-10 years. So keep the dream alive, I guess.
Thank you. Nikolai?
No, I don't think there's much to add here. Yes, I would just once again would emphasize that we do need to talk about practicalities. We need to be very down to earth. We need to be practical. We need to count money. We need to understand the organizational side, so on and so forth. And the more we know, the more likely that we'll finally engage in nuclear disarmament. So yes, knowledge is power, as always. So let's know more.
Keep the dream alive, and knowledge is power.
Okay, keep dreaming, no more. Did not mean it that way. On that note, just a reminder that the study is now available online. You can scan the QR code, or you can go on our website. And if you are in person, your goodie bag will be the physical copy of the Irreversibility study. And with that, thank you all for joining us here in person and online. Good day to you all.